Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Shelley Fold-Nasso, CEO of Cancer Nation, and we're really excited to have a wonderful conversation today about CAR T cell therapy with a distinguished survivor and advocate, Arnoldo Rodriguez. I want to thank the Cancer Nation team for putting this together, helping us get ready for this webinar, and also thanks to our sponsor, Kite, for sponsoring this webinar. So CAR T cell therapy it stands for, chimeric antigen receptor T cell therapy. And it's a type of immunotherapy that uses patients' own T cells to fight cancer. But it's generally just referred to as CAR T. And it's a relatively new therapy that's shown a lot of promise. And our guest today, Arnoldo, participated in one of the first clinical trials for CAR T cell therapy. So he's going to share his own experience both with the therapy itself, but also with the recovery and with participating in a clinical trial, and also his advocacy for others in his community and how he shares his experience to try to help others. So Arnoldo, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you start by just telling us a little bit about your diagnosis and your first round of treatment?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you, Shelley, for allowing me to be here to share my experiences with the group, the participants, and certainly thank all the team at Cancer Nation. So, my diagnosis, I guess, is twofold because I was diagnosed with prostate cancer back in 2010. So that allowed me to really learn about the different treatments that were available to me so that I could get better quicker and get back to my business. I was a very busy sales executive at the time, so I wanted the one that was, the most efficient and certainly the one that would get me to better health quickly. Through that, I learned a lot in preparation for the second diagnosis in 2010 of lymphoma. And my diagnosis was a little difficult. I like to characterize it as a wardrobe malfunction, you might say, because I remember at that time I was losing weight without even trying. So, I lost about 20 pounds. And I remember I was real active and I was traveling for work at the time quite a bit. And when you do that, you have an established routine. My routine was I'd fly into, where I'm going to do my work, go into the hotel the evening before, get ready for a little workout at the gym, put on my attire, and then go do my dinner, email, all of that stuff in preparation for the next day. Well, I found myself going into these places and I would be exhausted. I would be really, really tired. So I knew that was not a good sign. Then I had a lump in the back of my neck that just kept growing, and it really didn't hurt. It was just a lump. And then I noticed also lumps under my neck. So at around that time, I flew home and then I was getting ready for an appointment, and my wife had been out, and she had my suit ready, and I put my suit on and it didn't fit. It didn't fit. So that was my wardrobe malfunction. I knew something was wrong. So that's when I started calling my doctors. And I had an appointment with my cardiologist, and he said, "Yeah, let's get you some blood tests." Well, he called me. He said, "Your white blood cells are off the chart. We need to get you into a PET scan, see what's going on." Well, they found out it was a type of cancer, and around that same time, my wife had just been diagnosed with lymphoma. So we were both partners in dealing with the diagnosis. So because my doctor said, call your oncologist. At that point, I knew it was easy for me because I had been through my prostate experience back in 2010. And at that time, I talked to doctors where I live in South Texas, and I found out that, they're very patient centric and they do the best they can with their resources. They really weren't specialists in lymphoma. So it appeared to me that they would treat all lymphoma in the same way, regardless of the type of lymphoma. So more of a, spray and pray approach. So in other words, just throw some chemo at it. Let's pray. Let's hope it works. Right. But, I knew through my research that, MD Anderson was the only research hospital that focused specifically with cancer. So we went to Teresa and I went to MD Anderson, and we started treatment within a week. We were both getting chemo, and we would be like in rooms right next to each other. And sometimes it'd be like, okay, you do your treatment this day, I'll do it the next day, and I'll be with you. I'll be your caretaker, right? So it was a great experience for us because that prepared us for what would happen after not just one relapse, but two relapses. So I know that's a lot, but that was my experience with my first diagnosis. My first treatment, I was at a stage 3, so my cancer was pretty well advanced. Teresa's was a stage 1, so she quickly got to remission, and we were both in clinical trials for lymphoma at this point. This is way before the CAR T cell. Well, because I was at stage 3, I had several complications. My immune system was bottomed out. I caught pneumonia. I caught coronavirus before the pandemic. I also developed what they call pleural effusion, which is liquid in your abdomen. So they had to put 2 catheters on each side of my abdomen, and those had to be drained daily. So my poor wife is draining those, every day for 3 months. So shortly after that, continued, and I got into remission. So celebration time. Didn't last long. The following year, had a relapse. So we got into 3 different types of chemo, and it worked for a little while. Well, I relapsed again. So it's 2 relapses with lymphoma. So then my doctors said, well, this is the only thing we have left for you is something called this cancer drug. It's a pill called Zylig. Well, that pill was not covered by my insurance. It was $14,425 per month. So, I knew I just couldn't cover it. So I told my doctor, I said, this is MD Anderson. Let's look for other resources. And then that's when she said, well, just bear with me. We're waiting to see if we get approved for another clinical trial, and you're a good candidate for it. You're a great candidate for it. 3 days later, she called. She says, good news, we got approved. You're an excellent candidate. So it's called CAR T cell. My research assistant will call you and give you all the specifics and the process and so on. So I got a call from Lee DeZosa, just a wonderful person that I think the world of. And she explained it to me. She says, CAR T cell. It's chimeric antigen receptor cell, T cell. And what it is, they we'll work with a drug company. In this case, it was Kite. Um, and they will help us in providing your cure. And they'll take T cells from your blood, right? They'll filter them in a process called apheresis, and they'll filter them from your blood, and then it's deposited. That blood is deposited back into you. We'll send those cells to the Kite Pharma laboratories. They will modify it genetically in such a way that when they send it back, we'll infuse it into your body, and that will become your cancer killer. So I say, yay, let's do it. So I know that's a long explanation to your question, Shelley, but that's the process.
That's how you got there. So, okay, I have so many questions for you. One is, when you decided to go to MD Anderson as opposed to somewhere nearer to your home and to get a second opinion, like what inspired you to do that? You said that you maybe didn't feel comfortable with what the advice you were getting closer to home. Can you talk a little bit about, because one of the things we see in our survey that we do every year is that we ask about getting a second opinion. And last year, only about 29% of people said that they sought a second opinion. We asked the question again this year, and we're going to have those survey results later this fall. But I'm just interested in what made you think that you needed to get a second opinion and to travel for your care.
Absolutely. So I did go to, well, the first the oncologist that first diagnosed me, he walked into I went for the results. He walked into the room, and his delivery was, well, you have cancer. Just like that. So that was a traumatic kind of impact, right, for me. I mean, that was not the delivery that I was expecting from an oncologist. So he said, nah, we'll do a couple of rounds of chemo or radiation, you'll be fine. So it seemed to me that he wasn't taking this seriously.
Mm.
So I said, okay, thank you, sir. I'll get back in touch. So I went to see another doctor, and I didn't know much about oncologists at the time. He was affiliated with one of the doctors, and he said, like, well, what happened? Like, I had caused it, right? I got the impression that I did something to cause my diagnosis of cancer. What happened? Well, I can't tell you what happened. I'm here for some help, for some solutions. So then I started reaching out, talking to friends whose family members had gone through, cancer episodes as well. And MD Anderson kept popping up, and they kept saying they have clinical trials. Clinical trials are usually, programs with great outcomes. They're innovative. So they've got a lot more solutions for you. So at that point, I called MD Anderson and referred myself. And they said, okay, we will see you. And that was for my prostate episode. When both Teresa and I got diagnosed with lymphoma, there was no question. Mm-hmm. We're going there. We had a great experience, and this is our solution. And they gave us some great explanations. First of all, they were very empathetic, right? And they tried to explain, what they don't know the causes, but we have some solutions for you. And they talked about the different types of chemo that are more targeted toward lymphoma. And then they talked about a clinical trial. And we were like, can we both get in? Can we both get in? And they said, absolutely. And, we were so lucky and blessed in many ways because we had the same doctor, right?
Mhm.
Those doctors to us now are like our family, they're family members.
Yeah, I don't often hear about people, two spouses being treated for the same kind of cancer at the same time. It's kind of an amazing story, and it's
It is.
wonderful that you were able to support each other that way. Before I continue with the questions, I just want to say you can use the chat to ask questions. I know before the webinar, we got some questions when people registered that were a little specific in terms of medical advice. We cannot give medical advice here. Arnoldo is not a clinician. He's sharing his experience as a patient, but still feel free to ask questions in the chat. And of course, we'll send out a recording afterward. And so if you miss anything, you can watch the recording. So the next question I want to ask is, so when your doctor mentioned CAR T to you and a clinical trial, it sounds like you were very on board with the idea of clinical trials. How did they describe, or your doctor or the research assistant describe to you what CAR T was? You did a nice job explaining it, but when you said genetically engineered cells, like that can be scary to people, but it didn't scare you off. So how did they describe it to you, and what made you feel comfortable with this, especially since this was one of the first clinical trials? It was very, very new. How did you have any fears about it? How did you get over any concerns that you may have had?
Well, you always have fears because they during the consultation they'll tell you, if you're a candidate, these are the steps that have to occur, right? Before, we do treatment to see if you're a good candidate for not or not. Um, when they told me, they were taking your own, T cells and sending them somewhere, but it's not going to affect you in any way. Um, it's not going to affect how you feel, right? So, your body quickly produces these cells at any rate. So you'll be fine. And I guess it was just the manner in which they explained it that really was comforting to know that this was a safe process.
Mhm.
So, it's the apheresis. I mean, you just sit there. It's a 3-hour process and you have to stay still. You really can't move. But I have had allergy tests in the past that were similar to that, right? The old school allergy exams. So I said, you know what? I had been through cancer already. I had relapsed twice. It's like at this point, I was not too fearful of whatever was thrown at me because it was all done in the spirit of let's get you healthy again, let's get you better.
Mhm.
So, and I guess that for any CAR T cell candidate, I'm thinking they would probably feel the same way. You've already relapsed twice. I mean, that's part of the qualification, right? Relapsing more than once.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you're open to whatever at this
Yeah.
point. Just
By
do it
that
in
point,
the right. Yes.
yeah. I mean, especially, if the second time you relapse, I mean, I can imagine that must have felt very almost like despair. And so to have an option, a treatment option that's so new and promising would be.
Yes. And what was more fearful to me, Shelley, was when that first treatment, oh, I'm sorry, the second treatment before the CAR T cell uh, was not an option for me because it was prohibitively expensive.
Mhm.
And she said, I'm coming back to you for a solution. It was that period where I was most fearful,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because you always have these thoughts about what if she can't find anything? What are we doing now? But I
Mhm.
mean, at the same time, I knew just going to leave me hanging. I
Mhm.
knew they'd find an alternative, but that was more fearful than anything. So when she told me we've been approved for this CAR T cell with Kite Pharma, uh, and you're the first candidate to be in there, uh, no fear. To
Really?
me, that was a blessing. I was like
Mhm.
relieved. I was like excited, and my response to the researcher to Lee was, when can I start?
Mhm.
And remember, I don't. MD Anderson is not around the block from me,
Yeah.
right? It's a 400-mile trek from here. So I said, I can get in the car tomorrow and be there. And they said,
Mhm.
no, we'll schedule it. But yeah, let's do this as soon as possible. Let's see if we can do it for next week. And yeah, they did the following week. So
Awesome. So
that
I
was
know,
my experience anyway.
yeah, sign me up. When can I start?
Yes.
One of the things that's really important in participating in a clinical trial is the informed consent process. And it
Mhm.
sounds like they explained to you what the potential side effects were. Do you have any uh, feedback on how that process went? And I mean, it's like you said, you were looking for options, so you were willing to try whatever. But there are some potential serious side effects
Oh, yeah.
that can happen. So what was that like for you?
Well, here's my informed consent, all 21 pages right here. But really what it is a process where you do the consultation initially, right? And they tell you, you know, the that they're going to have to determine to see if you're a candidate for this or not. And they explain the process to you. Then they do the before treatment process, and they explain the CAR T cell in a much more detailed manner than what I've been able to do here, right? And all the tests that are going to have to take place. You also do a chemo treatment ahead of time, but it's not uh, to target your cancer. It's more to condition your cells to be able to accept the CAR T cell,
Mm-hmm.
the the, the new medicine, and all of that. More than likely, they'll have to do a bone marrow sample specimen, and I had this before. I think this was the most painful part of it because it's a fairly large needle. It goes into either one of your hips or the base of your spine, and they take out some of your marrow from your bones,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a little bone sample in there as well. And they need a certain quantity of that. So if they don't get enough, guess what? They're going to poke you again till
Mm-hmm.
they get the right quantity. And then they talk about the treatment, right? And some of the possible side effects. And these side effects are no different than the side effects that you can expect from normal treatment of
Mm-hmm.
your lymphoma. I guess what was the scariest for me was that there may be some confusion
Mm-hmm.
where you don't know who you are, you don't recognize your loved ones. And if that's the case, it may delay your stay at the hospital. Of course, the doctors are prepared to deal with it. So it's not that big of a deal once you know that they know how to handle those side effects. You have to stay in the hospital for 7 days after the infusion. So luckily, I did not have that. On day 7, I had a headache,
Mm-hmm.
and it was not a massive headache. I've had greater headaches after, a few margaritas and that kind of thing. Right? But it was a mild headache, and they said, we're going to keep you another day. So, that was it for me. I did meet some other folks. I used to walk around the hospital. They encouraged the walking. So I
Mm-hmm.
would do that twice a day almost. I wanted to get out there and be active. And, I would meet some of the other patients. And we met a young couple from, I believe they were from Oklahoma, just the nicest people. And we were talking to the husband of the patient. His spouse was the one that had received CAR T cell, and she had gone into a state of confusion. So he was pretty worried about it. We were pretty worried for him and her as well. But, it was a temporary thing. So, it happens to some people. It didn't happen to me. And it's also a rare kind of occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that was the scariest part.
Yeah. And that's also why the caregiver is particularly important with CAR T cell therapy, because they need to be on the lookout for that and they need to know what potentially to expect. Can you talk a little bit about your wife's experience, and how she was educated about what to do to support you, and how she was supported in her role as a caregiver? And I think also, I'll just say, one of the benefits of a clinical trial, in addition to being able to try new treatments, is that you get excellent clinical care. And sometimes there's more support than you might have if you're not in a clinical trial, for some of the, side effects and some of the other things that you're dealing with as you're going through the trial. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about your wife's experience.
Absolutely. And again, this is an area where we think, we were more fortunate than perhaps other folks, in that Teresa was, a retired school teacher already. So, and we had gone through the initial phases of lymphoma together. So the clinical team met with her and kind of did a little training on, this is your role as a caregiver. We know he's your husband, but this is how you need to take care of him. So, they kind of educated her on, being not just a physical support system before, during, and after the treatment, but also being that emotional support person as well. So in case, I get into a little, depressive mode, the poor me syndrome that happens to a lot of us cancer patients, that she'd be able to support me and kind of talk me up, right? So the emotional, the physical support, all of that was important. And then part of the treatment process is knowing that there's some possible side effects that can happen after your 7-day stay at the hospital. No, you have to stay for at least 4 weeks within the vicinity of the hospital, in case there's an emergency. So we had to, leave our home here in South Texas and look for an apartment, a place to stay in Houston, 2 miles from M.D. Anderson, within that vicinity. That was not an easy task, okay, because there's a lot of need. There's a lot of people looking for apartments. The social services department from M.D. Anderson also reached out and they said, we can help you. Here's a list of places to call, yada, yada, yada. Of course, a lot of them have waiting lists. So we just ended up renting a place and paying for it, right? Luckily, unexpected to us, Kite Pharma was able to help us with some of the expenses at the end. So, that was great. But again, we left home and Teresa and I were there through the holidays, because my infusion was actually on December the 12th, I believe, right? And I had to stay in the hospital through Christmas. I think I went home the day after Christmas or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a picture of me doing the walking around the hallways at MD Anderson, and I stood by this Christmas tree and celebrated Christmas at MD Anderson. Zach, do we have that picture we can show?
I'm sure at the time it was probably not the most exciting way to spend Christmas, but now looking back, as you're doing so well, it's worth it to miss a Christmas at home for that.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I also have a picture there to share with the group of when I checked in for my infusion. This is the day before. See if we can get, there we go. So, they prepare you, the clinical team comes in, your nurses, the doctors, whoever's going to be treating you, and they introduce themselves and they get you ready. So right after that, they got me ready. I got into my hospital attire and they put me in the bed. I think I also have one to share with the group of, yes, this is when I received the infusion itself. And during this time, because I was the first one in this clinical trial, the doctors that were on the floor came in, the nurses, the clinical team, and they kind of, did a big thing about it, a little celebration. So I was pretty excited. Plus, I was getting a lot of attention at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah, if you were the first patient in the trial, I know that's very exciting, especially for
Yeah.
something such a new form of treatment that was so promising. And I will say that some of the kind of I know that uh, the companies that have CAR T cell therapies have worked really to make sure that there are more facilities, more cancer centers that can offer it, so that people don't have to travel as far. But they also have a pretty rigorous process to be an accredited facility to do it because they want to make sure it's done well. But also, there have been some changes with the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, to lift some of the requirements. You were one of the first. So now that more people have had this treatment and they know how to handle some of these side effects, some of the things that you had to go through, the process isn't quite as onerous these days in a lot of cases. And I'm not
Right.
an expert in all of the details around that, but I do think that they're trying to make it more accessible to patients while at
Mhm.
the same time still ensuring their safety. Because in ensuring that there's a way to handle any of those side effects that can come up in the weeks and months after receiving the cells. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what were some of the things you experienced afterward when you got to go home, and how was the recovery from it, and any challenges that you faced since you had the CAR T infusion?
So after the CAR T cell, of course, we had to stay in Houston, and then I'd have some follow-up days where I'd have to come back to the clinic, and they would, do some, blood draws and all of that to make sure I was good. And then they did the final PET scan mid-January, and it was clean. Everything was clean. So they said, "You're in remission. You can go home." So it was great. So they said you can't drive for 6 weeks because there's still a possibility, something may happen. So, and that was okay. I can live with any of that.
Mhm.
So we came home, and I guess I started having some complications, not because of CAR T cell. I think CAR T cell is really what saved my life,
Mhm.
but because of all the treatment that I had had with my two relapses over the course of 3 years, right?
Mhm.
I did start having some complications. The first thing that happened was I had a fractured vertebrae. So that was taken care of there at MD Anderson. So they did a vertebroplasty. They just kind of glue it back together. So that was good. But then, I had rosacea. I've had that for many years. But all of a sudden, I had all kinds of complications where my skin became more sensitive than normal. So any little thing would cause me to break out in rashes. So my dermatologist, although he's one of the best, I would say, in the state, Dr. Newton, he tried everything. He kept calling me back. Let's try this medication. Let's try that. We finally found the answer. But even then, my skin remains to be sensitive. So he doesn't want me to be outside in short sleeves, in my patio. I can't use shorts anymore or I will break out. I was also diagnosed with osteoporosis. All that chemo just weakened my bones. So I was an avid jogger before all of this episode, the cancer journey. So I had stopped jogging. So I can't jog anymore. And so, I kind of got my own gym going at home and got into a workout routine as a result of my CAR T cell. I'm going to focus on my health. So, I do the elliptical 5 days a week, minimum of 35 minutes, strength training 3 times a week. Well, then it turns out that I developed spinal stenosis, and it was a severe case. And I just had my surgery last month, August the 5th. And thank God I'm recovering very well. I'm going to therapy and all that. So I'll hope to be on the elliptical pretty soon again once they give me the green light. So let's see, I had some other complications as well, but I would say that those are some of the major ones that happen. But that just gives us a greater reason to continue focusing on healthy habits, right?
Yeah.
The exercise, the eating healthy, the advocating for yourself when you go to a doctor. So yeah, I would say it kind of changed my path of how to stay healthy.
Yeah, well, and the exercise is so important. I was just on a call yesterday about trying to get more exercise oncology more widely in use because there's just mountains of evidence that exercise is really important during and after cancer treatment to help reduce the risk of recurrent, help with, all of the outcomes. So that's great that you are on your elliptical every day. That's awesome. And the strength training is also so important. So what about finding a primary care provider to help manage your care back in South Texas where you live? Because I know you've done plenty of traveling to Houston for your treatment, but you don't want to have to go there for primary care, but you need somebody who understands what you've gone through and can help support you in some of your post-treatment needs.
Absolutely. And what a great question because, I had a primary care doctor for many, many years and, he retired and passed on and his independent practice was sold to a corporation or whatever. I decided, I'm not going there anymore. They wanted to start all over with the records and whatnot. And I said, I'm not down for that. So I found another primary care doctor where I live. And, unfortunately, I don't think I was getting the kind of care that I needed as a cancer survivor. In fact, I would ask them to, you know, uh, request the records from MD Anderson, and I signed the release at MD Anderson and everything else. Well, he wasn't doing that, because I was already on Medicare. He wanted to call me in for these, 6 weeks checks, but then not call me and tell me what the results of my blood tests were. So I knew that was not a good thing. So I started shopping around and I started, this is where I really started focusing on advocacy and really being my own advocate. So I looked for a few doctors. I would do some research on the internet, do all kinds of reviews before I decided on a doctor. So I found one, lived the office is just a mile from my house. And I went to see her, took all my documentation from MD Anderson, all my afflictions and everything else. And I pretty much told her, are you going to be able to help me? Will you look at my data from MD Anderson? And I was most impressed with her because she walked into the consultation with her laptop. And she says, that's what I'm all about. I'm connected to the platform at MD Anderson. Let's do this. So yeah, it took some heavy lifting to find the right page, the right person that would be willing to really focus on my cancer survival as a way to treat me with my other afflictions, right?
Mhm.
So now every time I have a scheduled visit with her, I always schedule it around my MD Anderson checkups, around my other checkups, and then I always take my data to her, right? Uh, and with that, I would say part of being an advocate is keep a digital trail of your blood tests, right? Of your platforms with the cancer hospital, like MD Anderson has the My Chart. And I know that's a common thing with most hospitals now. And that helps me when I go to any new doctor or the emergency room because you can say, here's my medications, right? It's on the app. I mean, everything is there for you. So I, for one, am a fan of Quest Diagnostics because my doctor sends me for a some blood panels. It's done within her hospital. I want to be able to have those results on an app that I can share with whoever, right? So Quest Diagnostics has an app. It has historicals. You're able to track trajectories for all of your blood results. So, I mean, that is just so important as a cancer survivor that you maintain that digital trail, research your doctors, and make sure that they're going to meet your needs as not just a regular patient, but as a cancer survivor.
Mhm. Thank you. That's really important advice. And I know that, advocacy really starts with advocating for yourself, but you also advocate for others because I know we've talked before about your advocacy in your community and just in terms of helping other cancer survivors and supporting them. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then also, maybe as part of that or maybe separately is what advice would you give to someone, a survivor or family member who's considering CAR T cell therapy?
So, yes, I feel very fortunate that I was able to survive, this journey, and it's still a journey. It'll continue to be a journey. And as we like to say as survivors, it's the new normal for us, right? Because we know the cancer is there. It could come back at any time. We may be in remission, but we're not cured, right? So we got to continue advocating. And, I feel fortunate that I had all this support from, MD Anderson and my doctors. I want to be able to do that and share my experiences with others as well.
Mhm.
So, I do spend the time, on the phone with other folks who call me and they say, well, so and so is going through this. Can you call them? Right. And I'm happy to have a chat with them. I don't care what time it is. We'll do it. And I'll offer, what my experiences are and provide perhaps some suggestions. I've also learned that, at least where I live, there's a lot of families that are underserved that have other challenges that I don't have. They may have financial challenges. They may have language challenges. So, you know, I really love Cancer Nation because, if they allow me to be able to touch some folks that perhaps can't be touched in any other way, if I can be that bridge, I'm here, right? So that's of concern to me, right? And so I'm here. I'd like to say that I'm a resource for other cancer survivors or those who have been diagnosed and they don't know what path to take, right?
Yeah.
So I'm working with you all. I'm also working with the cancer survivor community.org as well. And, we're putting together a little resource for survivors there. And yeah, I mean, also, I would say for those that are looking at CAR T cell, there's just an abundance of information on the internet. I mean, right now, if you go to the Google and you just type in CAR T cell, you're going to have a lot of resources right there. Of course, Cancer Nation, that's a great resource for you guys. Cancer support community. Kite Pharma has some excellent resources on their web page as well for CAR T cells. So, more and more, it looks like it's becoming a much more visible option for cancer survivors, and in particularly those who have gone through relapses.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. Go to the YouTube videos, go to the Instagrams, all of those things. They're great information. Of course, sometimes you'll find some contradictory information, and that's where you really have to start looking at. I like to go to Mayo Clinic, I like Cleveland Clinic, of course, MD Anderson, all of those research-based organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important to go to credible sources because there is a lot of.
I also, had the good fortune of reaching out to CAR T cell patients while I was at MD Anderson before my relapses, right? And then when I relapsed, I knew I could reach out to them. And they told me their experiences as well. So I would say reach out to other cancer survivors, CAR T cell patients and CAR T cell survivors, because that's your most reliable source of information, those that have gone through the journey.
So what do you wish you had known before you had your CAR T cell therapy?
So I guess I would have known. I would have known that there was such a thing as CAR T cell, right? So that I could have done a little more research when they first explain something to you, and your focus is just give me a solution, whatever. But I think that if I would have studied this ahead of time, like if MD Anderson would have told me, if you ever relapse more than once, these are some possible resources, and CAR T cell being the main one, right? And at that point, you start, looking ahead and planning just in case,
Yeah.
so that you know what is there. Of course, when I did my CAR T cell and I started looking for resources online, I didn't find a lot of resources, at least in my region in South Texas where I live. My clinical team said, see if there's any oncologists in, where you live, close to where you live, that may know about CAR T cell and what to do in case there's an emergency. So I said, okay, I'll do that. Of course, I was in Houston. I had to stay there for a while. So I spent, a couple of days just calling different oncologists in South Texas. and I could not find a single one that could speak to knowledge of CAR T cell. So, yeah, I think that was one of the challenges, in coming back is what if there's an emergency and my providers in South Texas don't know how to treat this side effect. But luckily, we didn't have any
Hmm.
emergencies or anything like that.
I think hopefully that's getting better too, because you were so early in the process. And I know that there's been a lot of work done from the authorized treatment centers to reach out to oncologists who may refer patients to them. And so they understand and kind of have a two-way relationship. So if an oncologist that doesn't offer it knows where to send people and then gets information back so that they can sort of take over managing that patient's care when they come home. I think that's a model that some cancer centers have really tried to work with their kind of local or network of community oncologists so that people do have that support back home if they did have to travel for their treatment. So my hope is that that has gotten better or will continue to get better as more people have CAR T cell. And I know that they're also, studying it in more indications and more, solid tumors and beyond blood cancers. And hopefully that'll be the future since it has been such an effective treatment for so many people. And I think, the idea is just to keep finding more ways to use this therapy that where it's safe and effective.
Hmm. And for other cancers beyond the typical blood cancers that they're doing or
Mhm.
dealing with right now as well.
Are there any support services that you wish you'd had? It sounds like you had to really do a lot of the work to find that support for yourself and do the research. Are there things that you wish you'd had to help support you through the process?
Um, I'm a very resourceful person, so I'm like the one that likes to look for the resources before I reach out. But that's why I think there's folks that perhaps, you know, don't know about these resources. And, that's where I hope that as an advocate, I can be a resource for others. I do wish that my doctors down here would have been a little more knowledgeable about different treatment options, for lymphoma, for, prostate cancer, when I was going through that initially, right? So rather than just saying, okay, you have lymphoma, let's schedule you for treatment. Um, had I not had that first prostate experience and learned about, MD Anderson, their clinical teams, their wonderful, clinical trials and everything. And I probably would have been stuck with just the traditional generic uh, chemo treatment
Hmm.
for lymphoma. And I imagine that there's other folks out there that may be going through that and they're looking for resources as well.
Yeah. So your prior experience with prostate cancer taught you how to be your own advocate and be that resourceful person that you need. Because I do think that, there's definitely some evidence that not all the people who could potentially benefit from CAR T cell therapy are getting referred to it. And if
Exactly.
you don't know as a patient to ask, and if your doctor doesn't talk to you about it, then, I think there's a concern that not everybody who could potentially benefit are finding out about it.
Hmm.
Um, and we know from our surveys that patients really rely on their doctors for that information. Now, many are resourceful like you and do the research or find other patients. But that's also a lot, to ask when you've got the overwhelming, diagnosis, and especially like when you had your second relapse. But you had that experience to help you and show you kind of how to advocate for yourself.
And I have spoken to some friends who have been going through, some cancer types and, in other parts of the state. And it's like their hospital just doesn't have another option for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I'm able to tell them, well, maybe you should go to MD Anderson,
Mm-hmm.
have a consult with them. Because I think that, they're not going to give up on you. They're going to find an option. And that's the beauty of clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would, I would even say that, for those going through, cancer, that you have that conversation with your doctor and ask, is there CAR T cell treatment available? Are there clinical trials available? And if not, perhaps consider, going away for treatment,
Mm-hmm.
because that may be, the only option to, a better recovery.
Right. And not everybody has that ability to, but if you can, sometimes that's the way to get the best care if
Mhm.
you need a clinical trial that's not available near you. Well, Arnoldo, thank you so much for sharing your experience today. I really enjoyed speaking with you and hearing about your experience. And I'm so grateful that you're doing well and you recovered well from your surgery last month and that your wife is doing well. So it's you're very blessed and we're grateful for you sharing your experience. And I want to say too that we are going to be hosting a Spanish language version of this webinar in 2 weeks. I do not speak Spanish, so I will not be asking the questions, but Arnoldo will be talking with Marielle McLeod, who is going to host that webinar. And we are really excited about being able to offer it in Spanish to make sure that we can reach people who might otherwise not be reached. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you again, Arnoldo, for sharing your experience and for your advocacy. We are really grateful to you.
Thank you very much, Shelley, for allowing me to do this and share my experiences. And I'm grateful to you and Cancer Nation for all that you do, as well as to Kite Pharma for the sponsorship today. So
Thank you.
thank you.